Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, he served as mayor of Los Angeles from 2005 to 2013. Now, Antonio Villaraigosa tells us why he wants a shot at being California's next governor. Plus, this week, Congress rolled back rules designed to protect consumer privacy online. We look at how that could affect what internet providers do with your data. But first, as part of our ongoing coverage of the first 100 days of the Trump administration, this week, flanked by coal industry workers and executives, President Donald Trump signed a new executive order on the environment. The new order effectively ends climate change policies made under President Obama. It allows construction on new coal-fired power plants while ending recent measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. President Trump championed the move as a way to bring back coal mining jobs.
My administration is putting an end to the war on coal. Going to have clean coal, really clean coal. With today's executive action, I am taking historic steps to lift the restrictions on American energy, to reverse government intrusion, and to cancel job-killing regulations.
But critics say the order will do little to help the coal industry since other sources of energy like natural gas are already cheaper and cleaner. Joining me now is climate scientist and executive director of the California Academy of Sciences, Jonathan Foley. John, nice to have you here.
Thanks for having me here today.
What is your reaction to President Trump's move rolling back essentially federal mandates fighting climate change?
Well, they're just downright bizarre. Because, the science is clear that we're causing climate change, and that's very bad for the U.S. economy and our interest around the world. But also, these measures aren't going to bring back coal jobs. Those jobs are gone. They've been replaced by automation and machines. So these orders are not going to benefit the environment, certainly, and they're not going to be creating any real jobs. So I don't know what they're for. And
the president also referred to something as clean coal. Is there such a thing as clean coal?
No, there really isn't. There's never been demonstrated a clean coal technology that can completely remove all the pollution of burning coal. This is just something that the industry makes up as sort of a fantasy to continue to burn coal, but it's never happened. And in fact, the funding to even create that has routinely been cut by federal appropriators out of the Department of Energy. So that's just a fiction.
So speaking about this and taking a look closer at California, what impact do you think it will have in this state?
Well, California doesn't burn coal for its electricity sources, so this is going to have very little effect on our particular situation here. And of course, California has its own regulations about climate change. It's almost as if we're a separate country when it comes to those kinds of policies.
Well, we have a law already that requires California to essentially generate half of its electricity from clean sources by 2030.
Well, that's right, and that won't change. So I don't think anything in California specifically is going to change in terms of this particular legislation. But what's happening is really dangerous nationally. We are still part of the United States, and other states which were going in the right direction may slide backward. But what's even more disturbing is proposed budget cuts out of Trump's proposed budget to completely eliminate whole programs around renewable energy. For example, the ARPA-E program of the Department of Energy will be eliminated.
Severe cuts to the EPA.
Oh, yeah, and that's in the environmental protection area as well as in energy, and even at NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which just measures the temperature of the world and weather patterns. So here we are eliminating research in things like solar panels that create jobs, especially in California, eliminating environmental protection staff, and eliminating even the people who kind of track our storms and keep us safe from terrible weather events. This is just an unprecedented war on the environment, but also on science itself.
And you call it a war on science in your blog, in Scientific American. Can you expand on that? And is this the worst that you've seen it in all your years as a scientist?
Oh, absolutely. This is the worst. Science has always had a funny place in the American political landscape, but generally speaking, it's had bipartisan support. People of any political persuasion knew that the facts at the end of the day mattered. That, doing research on healthcare, what's going on in the environment, on new materials, on new engineering systems was ultimately good for us.
And even from a Washington standpoint, it has been bipartisan, right? There have been Republican presidents who were considered to be very good on the environment, even Richard Nixon, for example.
Well, some people would say Nixon was one of the best environmental presidents. The EPA was founded under Richard Nixon. So was the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species laws we have today were all founded in the early 70s under President Nixon. And George Bush the first even was a very good president when it came to basic science and the environment.
So then what do you think is the motivation now behind the war on science, as you put it?
Well, I think the motivation is if you can't win the war on policy and on facts, you attack the science itself. It's very, very clear today that burning coal, doing things in the fossil fuel industry are not in the American interest long term. They're not good for the environment, they're not good for our health, and things like solar and renewables are getting cheaper and creating more jobs. So I think this is basically an industry kind of fighting a losing battle, just trying to win a few more years. And in order to kind of get that message across, they can't win the war on facts, so they're trying to attack the scientists themselves and muzzle them so they can't speak out, eliminating their funding and intimidating them. This is something that's even worse than the proposed funding cuts, is putting a muzzle on federal scientists, telling them you can't use the words climate change if you work for the Department of Energy.
We've seen climate scientists harassed in the past. For example, one of the most famous cases happened about 7 years ago. Michael Mann, the Penn State University researcher, he received a white envelope containing white powder. It turned out to not be anthrax, but rather cornstarch. But still, it created quite a scare. Are you worried at all that we will now see a return to those days where we see lots of threats and harassment directed at scientists?
It happens every day, actually, and yeah, I think it's going to get worse, and it seems to have gotten worse in the last few years, but especially in the last few months. This is dangerous. I mean, just think about it. Scientists are like regular folks, just like you and me. They get up in the morning, they take their kids to school, they worry about paying their mortgage, and many of them are working for us. They're public servants. They're trying to keep us safe. They're trying to advance our technologies and make medical breakthroughs and so on. And yet at the end of the day, some of them are now being told by their president and members of Congress that they're liars and cheats and frauds. And on top of that, many of them get death threats or rape threats on social media on a daily basis.
Have you yourself gotten threats?
Yeah. Yeah, almost everybody I know, not lately, not very often. I run a museum now, but I'll probably get some after today, who knows. But yeah, that happens all the time. But Michael Mann, for example, was testifying in the House Science Committee the other day. He got a whole bunch of hate mail on social media. Almost every scientist I know who works in these issues has to put up with that. And, that's crazy. They're just regular folks who are trying to work for all Americans. They don't deserve that kind of treatment. No one does.
How does the war on science, as you put it, affect people's everyday lives?
Well, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect our health. It's going to affect our safety. It's going to affect the kinds of jobs we'll have in this country and how competitive we are abroad. And make no mistake about this. The kind of funding and positions and being cut and the muzzling of scientists in federal agencies, people are going to die because of this. We're going to have people dying from water pollution. We're going to see more storms without good tracking. We're going to see environmental toxins. We're going to see things that are very, very dangerous that really should be the job of the government to protect us from, and no longer will be the case. This is dangerous and it affects every American.
You're now in a position, and many other scientists, where they feel like they need to take a stronger, more vocal stand. You're planning to take part in next month's, in April's March for Science, and you're encouraging other scientists as well to become more political. Not everyone agrees with that stand, though. There are a fair number of scientists who believe that they should stick to science and not politicize any of this. What is your response to them?
Well, they're just wrong. I mean, politics with a lowercase p, if you will, is just, if you go back to the Greek word, politics means the affairs of the city. It just means, how do we govern ourselves? How do we talk about things? How do we solve our problems? So science has to be part of political discourse. It has to be part of what we talk about on a daily basis. Just how do we solve our problems together, since so many of these issues touch on science and technology. Now, politics with a capital P, if you will, like running elections and partisan politics, that science should have no connection to at all. I agree with that. But we should be connected to everyday conversations, whether they're in our town halls, our halls of Congress, or in courts. And science must be part of that, because science is so central to so many of those issues. And if scientists aren't in the room, who is? We're the only profession in the world that seems reluctant to even talk to our fellow citizens about the things we know about. And that's just crazy. And
how do you plan to win over people's hearts and minds?
I think scientists need to get out of their ivory towers, first of all, and just become, really part of the community, because we are. We're going grocery shopping and taking our kids to soccer like everybody else. But for some reason, scientists somehow keep themselves a little bit separate from the rest of the world, and we shouldn't do that. So I'd encourage folks to get out and really talk about what we know and who we are.
All right. Jonathan Foley, Executive Director of the California Academy of Sciences, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Earlier this week, lawmakers on Capitol Hill repealed rules designed to protect the privacy of consumers online. The rules would have stopped internet service providers like AT&T or Sprint from collecting customers' data and selling it without their permission. The White House strongly supports doing away with the privacy rules, which were passed by the FCC last October.
The White House supports Congress using its authority under the Congressional Review Act to roll back last year's FCC rules on broadband regulation. This will allow service providers to be treated fairly and consumer protection and privacy concerns to be reviewed on an equal playing field.
To discuss this further, I'm joined now by Jeremy Gillula, a senior technologist at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and also Larry Downs, project director at the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. Gentlemen, thank you both for being here.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, Jeremy, the new FCC rules that Congress repealed this week hadn't even taken effect yet. So what is the significance then of what Congress did?
Well, certainly, I would have classified the rules, if they had taken effect, as a huge win for consumer privacy. So we've lost that win. The other part is the way Congress decided to repeal the rules. It prohibits the FCC from enacting similar rules in the future. So it's really sort of cut the legs out from under the FCC's ability to regulate privacy of broadband providers.
And why do you say these rules would have been a huge win if they were allowed to stay and take effect? Why would they have been a huge win for consumers?
Because the rules effectively said that your internet provider, Comcast, Verizon, whoever, would have had to get your permission before sharing or selling your data. You would have had to opt in. And that hasn't been the case in the past.
And Larry, you have said in the past that opt-in option is not a good idea. Why?
Well, it's very expensive. It's confusing for consumers too, because of course, if ISPs have to get opt-in, everybody else is on this old regime of opt-out. So Google and Facebook and the like. So in some cases, you're not being collected if you're asked to, and then the other cases, you're only being collected if you've agreed to it. So what I would have preferred is to go back to what we had for the last 20 years, which is a uniform policy, always enforced by the Federal Trade Commission.
And what is that policy?
That's what they call notice and choice, where you, as a provider, you have to state what your privacy policy is, how you collect data and how you use it, and then give consumers the option of opting out if they don't like what you say.
And if you don't do anything, you're automatically considered in.
That's right.
Okay. And what is the problem with that, Jeremy?
So there's essentially two problems. One is nobody ever reads the privacy policies, right? Nobody bothers to read. I mean, I think there was some study that said you'd take up most of your entire life if you tried to read the privacy policies of every single platform you used. So just knowing that they're collecting it in the first place, unless you get some sort of indication that they're doing it, where they have to affirmatively ask you, is this okay with you? It's a low barrier to pass to be able to say, yeah, I'm okay with you using this information.
And Larry, you have said before that this is unfair, the rules that were repealed, because they targeted internet service providers. So let's take this opportunity to define what are internet service providers? How are they different from Google and Facebook? Because some people may be confused. And why do you think it's unfair?
Sure. So ISPs, they're the folks that will give you access, whether that's your mobile provider or your landline provider, your wireline provider. They're the access providers. Obviously, everybody else is what we sometimes think of as the content or the service provider, the Googles and the Facebooks and the like. And the problem is, right now we have an $80 billion internet advertising market. That's really what drives the internet's growth, free or subsidized services. Almost all of it is Google and Facebook right now. We'd like to see, frankly, more competition. We'd like to see more growth in that market. It's a great way for consumers to get free goods and services. And these rules would have made it much harder and more expensive for ISPs to break into that advertising market the way the other providers already can.
Your response?
The big difference is that your internet provider sees a whole lot more information. They see all of your traffic. Google and Facebook only see a small part of your traffic, and we have tools, you can choose not to use Google. It's a lot harder to change what your internet provider is. It's a little easier in San Francisco, the Bay Area, but in most of the country, most Americans only have one choice. You can also block the sorts of tracking and advertising that Google or Facebook do. It's a lot harder from a technical perspective to block the sort of tracking that your internet provider would do.
So that's the privacy aspects, right? But what about the point that Larry is making in terms of choking off innovation and competition and lowering prices, that this, in effect, would, if they had been allowed to stay in place, these rules would, in effect, have made it more expensive for ISPs to do business?
The only extra expense is they would have had to ask your permission first, essentially. The only innovation that's now this would have cut off is being able to sell and share your information without your permission. With these rules, ISPs could have done it as long as they asked you first. They could have offered discounts, they could have offered free services, but they would have had to get your permission before they could subsidize this stuff with your personal data.
So Larry, let me ask you this then. So part of your argument is that these rules were unfair because they applied only to internet service providers and not companies like Google and Facebook. If they had been applied to companies like Google and Facebook, would they have been more acceptable to you? No,
I think it's just the opposite. I mean, we like the model that we have now. Most consumers like the fact, they probably don't think about it, but that they get so much of what's on the internet for free or at a subsidized price. That's all based on advertising. We may not like to see the ads, but we understand that's the quid pro quo. So making everybody have to go through this process of asking and cataloging and giving the options and making people read all this stuff would have been a waste, frankly, of a lot of time and money for everybody. We'd much rather see everybody go back to the notice and choice regime the FTC has had in place for so long.
And in your writings, you have also said that groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU were really trying to use this issue of the rules that have now been repealed by Congress. We're really trying to use this as a wedge issue. What do you mean by that?
Well, and not so much the EFF, but a lot of the other consumer advocacy groups, frankly, don't like the advertising model. They don't want targeted ads, contextual ads at all. And so they would like to see all of this, as you just described, everything be opt-in. And they saw the FCC victory at the end of the Obama administration as the first step in that process. That's the reason why, frankly, Google and Facebook and others didn't go along, did not approve of what the FCC was trying to do, even though in some sense it was going to protect their advertising market.
But what about privacy? I mean, the points that Jeremy is making. Do you think that there are enough privacy protections right now? Because basically, with the repeal of these rules, what we have is the status quo. Do we have enough protections right now?
Well, I suppose it depends on who you ask. You know, consumers wear a lot of different hats when they're on the internet. Sometimes, you know, they get a lot of value for sharing information. Obviously, if you're buying something, if you're searching for something, you want to give as much as you can. The idea of being very careful about what you give and being sort of hygienic about giving information only what's needed to get what you want, I think is very important. But, you know, different ideas can happen, and I think with a single standard, we might see more innovation, more choices, so consumers who don't want to share can do things differently than those who like the free services.
Obviously, Jeremy disagrees, right, that there aren't enough privacy protections. So for those, what happened with the rules aside, for those who are still concerned about their privacy online, what can they do, Jeremy? Are there certain tools that they can use?
So in terms of getting away from this sort of internet provider tracking, unfortunately, the answer is there's not a lot you can do. The options aren't great.
VPNs or Tor?
So you can use a VPN. VPNs cost money. So you're basically.
Explain what a VPN is.
So a VPN is a virtual private network. It basically tunnels your traffic, encrypts it so that your internet provider can't see it. But you're paying another service for this. So it's essentially like a privacy tax, if you want to consider it that way. You could also use the Tor browser, which is it's a web browser you can download. It's free. The downside to Tor is that a lot of the browsing experience isn't as smooth. You'll encounter a lot of CAPTCHAs so that you're constantly, you know, analyzing funny pictures to prove you're a human. And so between those two, we've got something that costs money, or we've got something that's free but doesn't provide as smooth an experience.
Okay. All right, well, what's next, do you think, on this frontier? What about the whole concept of net neutrality? Do you feel like that's threatened?
I definitely think, I mean, both Republicans, Ajit Pai, the new chairman of the FCC, have all said that they want to roll back the net neutrality protections. They want to allow ISPs to create fast lanes and slow lanes. So I definitely think that's going to be the next big fight.
Larry, you agree?
No, I think what they've said is they want to roll back the decision in 2015 to turn internet service providers into public utilities. In fact, they're quite committed to the net neutrality rules themselves. They just need to find a different legal basis for it. And indeed, Republicans offered a bill in the end of 2014 that would have done exactly that, made it a matter of federal law, ended this pointless debate once and for all.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. I'm sure there is much more to come in the months ahead. You're both laughing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, very soon we'll see it again.
All right, thank you both. Jeremy Gillula with the Electronic Frontier Foundation and also Larry Downs with the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy. Even if you don't live in Los Angeles, you might have heard of Antonio Villaraigosa. He was the first Latino mayor of LA to be elected in more than 100 years. He served from 2005 until 2013. He now wants to be California's next governor. While the election isn't until next year, whoever wins the race will face a host of tough challenges, from housing to transportation to job creation. KQED's California politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos spoke earlier with Antonio Villaraigosa.
Thanks so much for being here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you are running for governor, and I'd love to just have you tell us why you're running and what really you're trying to convey to voters.
I was born and raised here in the Golden State, and I've often said this was the place that gave me a shot. And as I've traveled the state, what it's become crystal clear is that not enough people are getting a shot. Too many people are struggling. Yes, this is the 6th largest economy. Yes, we're growing faster than the national average. Yes, we've grown more jobs than Florida and Texas combined, but we're not growing together. We're leaving too many people behind. 77 of the top 300 cities in the nation with the highest poverty rate are in California. 3 of the top 5 cities with the highest poverty rate are in the Central Valley. I think we've got to grow our economy. I think we've got to invest in our education and train people for the jobs of the 21st century. I think the economy is critical to our future, and the next governor's got to be focused on the economy, creating jobs and lifting more people up into the middle class.
Is there a way to bring jobs to the Central Valley the same way that you could bring them to LA or Silicon Valley?
I think we got to invest in our schools. We've got to raise our standards, raise our expectations. We've got to bring technology into our classrooms. We've got to take our schools from out of a 19th century model into a 21st century model. We're going to bring arts and science back into our schools. We've got to train people for jobs in the new economy. You don't need a BS in engineering to be a coder, right, or a BS in biology to work in the health sciences, and yet we're not training people for those jobs.
You know, I'm curious, as LA mayor during the last economic downturn, kind of what lessons you would take from that to the State House if you made it there, and you know, would you support things like an additional taxes or reforming Prop 13, things that are very controversial?
Well, I've never been afraid to take on controversial issues. If you recall, people were saying back in 2009 that LA was going to go bankrupt, and I said, not on my watch. I made the tough calls. I streamlined our government. I had to address the fact that we weren't growing businesses in our town, so I made it free to open up a business in LA, and we doubled the number of small businesses coming to the city.
On taxes, though, I mean, this is something that, you know, our current governor has been very reticent to support. We've seen Prop 30 extended, but without, you know, some of the more regressive elements of it. I mean, is that an area that you think needs to be pursued, or do you think overall tax reform?
We have a broken tax system. It's broken at the top. It's broken. Our property taxes and Prop 13 is broken. You know, Think Long and California Forward, 2 bipartisan commissions have looked at this, and they said, if you're going to fix the tax system, you can't just fix it where you got to fix it all across the board, and that means we over-rely on the upper income tax. So what happens? A 3% drop in revenue can have a 20% impact on the budget because of the way capital gains works. And yes, our property taxes are lower than most states around the country, and we don't tax the service economy, which is one of the fastest growing parts of the economy. So if you're going to fix the tax system, you got to fix it all the way around. Yes, I could support tax reform. In fact, I've got the courage to take it on.
So we've seen a lot of mixed reactions in California from Democrats to this Trump administration. I think the legislature and a lot of lawmakers have come out, quite frankly, swinging. Is it useful to be so outspoken?
I understand why people are outspoken, as you said. I take umbrage with most of what I see coming out of Washington and coming out of President Trump's tweets and policies. I think the governor's found the right balance. I'm not going to respond to every ignorant tweet. The best way to respond to Donald Trump is to double down on what we do here and do it better. Look, California is the 6th largest economy in the world, and California welcomes its immigrants. You know, California understands that they have created wealth in this country, not just in tech and ag and the service economy and construction. They're growing business at a faster rate than the native born. We need to celebrate that and welcome that in a way that's very different from Donald Trump. We need to invest in infrastructure. He's talked about it. He hasn't done much on it.
Housing is such a huge issue in the state, particularly in, the urban coastal areas. And yet it's something that I think we've seen not a lot of attention paid to by Sacramento. Is that something that the state should be tackling?
Again, let me tell you what we did as mayor. In the middle of a recession, we put money aside for a housing trust fund. Then we went to the private sector and nonprofits to leverage that. We built 20,000 units of housing, not nearly what we need in a city of 4 million people. But at the state level, we need to do the same. We need to put a housing trust fund together that focuses on housing and transportation, that leverages what cities and counties are putting up, where we're making those links to address what people call smart growth, moving people closer to their jobs so that we're not commuting in the way that we do. We also need to look at public-private partnerships. The notion that the government's going to be able to do all of the infrastructure that we need just doesn't, it's just not a real solution.
You've had a long career in government. You left office in 2013, and I know for a while you came on as an advisor to the nutritional company Herbalife. They've been criticized by some as preying on the Latino community. I just want to ask, why did you work for them, and when did that end? They
were an LA company, and an LA company that's focused, as you said, on health and nutrition. I've used their products in the past. The fact of the matter is my mom sold Avon. She sold Tupperware. And that's what these people are doing. They're focused on health and nutrition, and they're building small businesses. Yes, they were recently chastised by the FTC. So have virtually every Fortune 500 company I can think of. And so, yes, I was working for them until about the end of the year. And now I'm campaigning and working for you.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And that will do it for us. For more of our coverage, go to kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thank you so much for watching.